So let's try and make sense of these tensions between Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and Pakistan caught in between. An opportunity for Asim Munir or a threat for Pakistan? Joining me on India First, Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain, former Kashmir Corps commander, someone who watches developments in the region very closely. Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, former ambassador to Libya, Jordan and Malta. Dr. Wael Awad is a very well-respected political analyst and a senior international journalist. Dr. James Dorsey is adjunct senior fellow at the Raja Ratnam Institute of International Studies, again an expert on Middle East and counter-terrorism. Gentlemen, wish you all a very happy new year. Welcome on India First. Dr. Dorsey, your reading of the Saudi Arabia-UAE tensions, has it caught the world quite by surprise, especially the bombing?
Essentially, Saudi and national interests diverge, and also their strategies in the region diverge. Saudi Arabia is first and foremost interested in security. It borders on Yemen. It has a 700-kilometer long border with Hadramaut, one of the provinces that is currently in play, and it wants a unified Yemen. Its basic strategy throughout the region is to support legitimately recognized governments, irrespective of whether or not they have failed. On the other hand, you have the United Arab Emirates, whose strategy is really based on exploiting situations in failed states, whether that is Yemen, whether that is Sudan, whether that is Libya. And it supports often rebel or secessionist forces in an effort to gain control of key strategic nodes, that is to say ports, nodes of transport, nodes of finance, and whether or not that is in the benefit of the country in question is not a concern that the UAE considers to any great extent.
Okay. Dr. Awad, the UAE announced a voluntary withdrawal of its remaining counter-terrorism units from Yemen following these Saudi airstrikes in Mukalla. They also cited personal safety and recent developments. But is this a tactical pullback, a strategic repositioning, or has Saudi Arabia shown its supremacy, sir?
Thank you for having me, and Happy New Year to you and all your guests and viewers. In fact, the fact of the matter remained that the Saudis and the Emirati were together in 2015 in the coalition formed by the two governments fighting the Houthis' influence and expansion in Yemen. And therefore, there was both of them at the same coin side that they are willing to see the defeating the Houthis and leaving the legitimate government recognized internationally of Aden, which is supported by Saudi Arabia and Emirates. But however, over the years, the Saudis and the Emiratis differ in their strategy and objective. While Saudi Arabia may look into Yemen as a weak government, there is much better than disintegration of Yemen. The Emirati had their own groups of supporting inside Yemen, and the differences came to the light, Gaurav, only in 2019 when the Southern Transitional Council, supported by Emirati, fought with the legitimate government of Aden, and then the Saudis and the Emirati differences smeared over the years, but it was under the ground till the Fujairah incidents happened, where the two ships were, as Saudi said, has been bombed because they bombed after they dislodged their shipment in Mukalla port and in Yemen. Therefore, the Saudi have asked the Emirati to withdraw within 24 hours. And I think the Emirati understood the message from Saudi Arabia, because this is touching its national interest, and immediately they withdraw. However, it doesn't mean that they have lost the influence. Still, they are very much influential in the Southern and the STC, the Southern Transitional Council, and they have quite influence also in many parts of Yemen. But I think the coming days, it will show more what will be the response from the Saudi toward the Emirati influence there.
Okay. General Hasnain, the fact that Saudi Arabia carried out an airstrike, is that crossing a certain red line? Is that making a statement? And does that indicate, if not supremacy, but superiority of Saudi Arabia militarily? Or is this just the first step? There could be retaliation. It could be in any way, including the proxy reinforcement of forces or rebels by the UAE.
Thank you, Gaurav. First of all, a Happy New Year to you and
Thank you,
all
sir.
our viewers, my colleagues on the panel. This is a very, very fascinating subject which has not really been discussed anywhere around the world. Let me try and give a slightly different perspective to it. While we have looked at Yemen, both my previous speakers have spoken about Yemen, we must also remember that the UAE is not looking at expanding its footprint of influence only in Yemen. It has gone into Libya, it has gone to Chad, it has gone to Sudan, it has gone to Somaliland. This entire area of the Red Sea, the lanes flowing through this, the energy flowing through this, UAE is obviously punching much above its weight. And for quite some time. The Saudis, peeved perhaps to a very great extent, now are looking at pushing back and also seeking their position under the sun in the Gulf politics, in Gulf influence, which they feel probably is getting diluted by the UAE presence all around. And this seems to be the point of contention here in Yemen, where the whole thing has come to a head here. A very strong message is being conveyed by the Saudis that it could lead to physical conflict. I don't think it will come down to conventional warfare, although at the moment what we are seeing is all the ingredients of a typical hybrid situation: proxies, a little bit of air warfare, drugs, looking at shipping lanes and things of that nature. What we have to remember at the bottom of this entire emerging rivalry is the fact that the Saudis actually look at being what the Emiratis already are, which is that they are much more influential, they have a great amount of soft power all over the Middle East and the Gulf region. This is something which the Saudis aspire for 2030, 2032.
Yes. So, Ambassador Trigunayat, does this show that the Arab world is now divided in more ways than one? Some argue Israel also has a role to play in this. There are others who say that Saudi Arabia is very keen, the economic power, the influence, that's wielded by UAE. They are now telling, Saudi Arabia is telling businessmen to invest in Saudi Arabia, to open offices in Riyadh. And all of this is just one more way that the war for economic influence is being, out there on the ground this way, sir.
Thank you, Gaurav, and Happy New Year to you and all
Thank you, sir.
esteemed panelists, as well as to your audience. This is not something that has happened today. Since the Arab Spring, we have witnessed that most of these Gulf countries, especially Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, and Turkey and Egypt, on the other hand, have weaponized their foreign policy. And this is a result of that. Now they want to achieve their strategic objectives of controlling various key ports and be maritime powers in that sense. And that's where the UAE comes into the picture. UAE went in with Saudi Arabia in 2015 to attack Yemen to fight the Houthis. But by 2019, they had decided it was an unachievable objective. And they walked out of it. And they follow a very smart diplomacy. But at the same time, they also have limitations to their power because Saudi Arabia is an acknowledged leader in the region, irrespective of whichever way you look at it. And Saudi Arabia has also reformed. Then I would like to say that what we are witnessing in the region is when we have these younger leaders, they are less patient. But today, of course, the tactical withdrawal, or whatever you may call it, of the counterterrorism forces of UAE, but also the Southern Transition Council has agreed to withdraw from Hadramaut. So that will take away the immediate escalatory ladder out of the scheme of things. But that doesn't mean it's going anywhere. Recently it is said that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was meeting Trump, and he asked him to rein in the Emiratis in Sudan. As a result of that. So I think that there is going to be a problem. We have seen what happened in 2017 to blockade of Qatar. And when Crown Prince wanted to normalize ties with Qatar and lift the blockade, Emiratis were not very happy. So there is divergence. Then coming to the Israeli question, that is also very much at play there, especially after the Somaliland. So we should not be surprised if Israel or some other country, which are under the influence of Emiratis, could recognize Southern Transition Council tomorrow as the leader of the Southern Yemen. So we might see once
And
again.
where does this leave? Okay, and I want to bring in, Dr. Dorsey once again into this conversation. Where does this leave Pakistan? Pakistan is considered close both to Saudi Arabia and to the UAE. Depends on both for money. Pakistan has gone to both the countries with a begging bowl. And Pakistan has forces deployed for the defense of Saudi Arabia. Does that put Pakistan on a sticky wicket with UAE, Dr. Dorsey?
Obviously, Pakistan is going to have to walk a fine line. I do think you have to keep in mind that the Emirati influence in Pakistan has expanded significantly, particularly its economic influence. You saw the recent plan for part of the loan that the UAE gave to Pakistan, to that to be translated into equity in the Fauji Foundation, which is the entity that controls the Pakistani military's vast interests in the economy. You've seen the agreement with the Pakistan Telecommunications Company, the foremost internet and communications company in the country. That the same is true for the ports. In contrast to China with Gwadar, the UAE has invested in both Karachi and Port Qasim, the most important ports in Pakistan. So UAE influence in Pakistan is very significant. They also just got 2 mining licenses in Balochistan, something that the Saudis had been eyeing in the past. So the Emirati influence in Pakistan is not to be underestimated, and in many ways may be greater than that of Saudi Arabia, despite the fact that Saudi Arabia signed the defense treaty with Pakistan.
Interesting. And that defense treaty, Dr. Wael Awad, the Saudi-Pakistan military pact, would mean Pakistan has to deploy forces to defend Saudi Arabia in case of any escalation with Yemen, additional forces. So how do you see this pan out vis-a-vis both now Iran and the UAE at a time, as Dr. Dorsey pointed out, UAE's financial influence is increasing, Fauji Foundation shares being taken by UAE, and the Pakistani military, at least a major part of the corps commanders, they prefer going to Saudi Arabia because of the money that they get there being deployed there every year.
Well, I think the Pakistani have been involved in the Yemeni war, despite the fact that they have denied of sending their own troops into there, but they have been always supportive of the Saudis' point of view, and when it comes to the Yemen and when it comes to the safeguard of the kingdom. Therefore, we know that for always there has been a battalion of the Saudi army inside the monarch, and they have been protecting them over the years. But however, of recently, this development in Yemen is, as I have been listening to the panelists, Gaurav, I think it's very important to highlight 3 major points. Irrespective of Pakistan role, Pakistan will always be whoever pay more, they will be siding with them. So therefore, they cannot side away from Saudi Arabia. But I think the major issue here, the geopolitical importance of Yemen, where because of the global trade, it comes from Bab al-Mandeb and passes into the Red Sea, where more than 14% of the oil trade takes place from there. And the United States with Israel have been advocating of a military bridge between Djibouti and Aden for years, that they wanted to control this passage. And they're accusing the Houthis of blocking it after the Israelis war on the Gaza and on the Palestinian. And then we realized that the elephant in the room is Israel, where they have also recognized the Somaliland. That's also important. Not to forget the oil field in Hadramaut area, which is the bordering Saudi Arabia, which is around 1,300 kilometers that Saudi having with Yemen. And they cannot sacrifice their national security, because the moment Yemen break away, like Somaliland, it is meant that Saudi Arabia at the verge of collapse, and that is what the Netanyahu government wanted to see, a total collapse of all the Arab nations that can be disintegrated, and therefore the greater Israel can be achieved. So that, therefore, there is the Saudis who are looking for 2030, after 2030, as a leader of the regional country, Arab world, they wanted to make sure that they are the one who can safeguard their own interests at first place, and also safeguard the interest of Yemeni, not to see it as a disintegrated, especially at this geopolitical changes taking so much steps and deteriorating in the Middle East.
Oh, absolutely. And so much happening just as 2026 begins, Ambassador Trigunayat. Would this indicate more trouble if I were to come back to our point on where does Pakistan stand in all of this? Field Marshal Asim Munir has battles on multiple fronts. Reports say Pakistan, there are many corps commanders who are not in favor of deploying a brigade on the Gaza border at all. Plus now the call to deploy perhaps a division plus in Saudi Arabia. At least that is what commentators in Pakistan are saying. What does this mean in your view for Asim Munir?
Gaurav, I maintain that Pakistan has this uncanny ability to encash its nuisance value with anyone and everyone because it's a rentier state. It's available. They have signed an agreement with Saudi Arabia. And in fact, today itself, they have signed another agreement with Saudi Arabia in the economic domain. So they continue to work with everybody, and they are trying to be a little bit an interlocutor right now between UAE and Saudi Arabia so that this doesn't pan out. You remember the former chief of staff, army staff, Rahil Sharif was heading the coalition forces, even though Pakistan was not a party to it. But of course, it will be walking a thin line if it takes sides. And at the moment, I don't think it's going to take sides. It has its own begging bowl out to everyone, but he's ready to support. And in the meantime, they already committed 25,000 forces, and already 25,000 are deployed in Pakistan. Their sorties are, they are paying, I mean, pilots are attacking in Yemen. All the Yemen fight was taken out by the Saudis. They were getting $7,500 per sortie. The Pakistani pilots were being paid. So they have been there. I mean, I don't see that Pakistan is in docks as far as this particular equation is concerned.
Okay, General Hasnain, given Pakistan's internal situation, whether it's in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province or in Balochistan, tensions along the line of control with India and Durand line with the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, can Asim Munir afford to deploy additional forces either in Saudi Arabia or this question of a brigade plus minus on the Gaza border?
Very interesting question, Gaurav. I remind you that way back in 1981, Pakistan provided 2 brigades to Saudi Arabia for the protection of the royal family. And these were ultimately used in the Gulf War also in 1990. They withdrew in 1991 when India's 3rd Strike Corps came up in Bhopal. And that is the time when they were forced to bring back those formations to make up the balance of forces. Considering the fact that at that time, Afghanistan was not alive, and today the Durand line is on fire virtually. 2 of Pakistan's corps, that's both their 9 corps and the other corps, 7 I think, and 9 corps, or 11 corps, which are both there, 11 and 12 corps, which are both deployed on the Afghan border. Considering that fact, the balance today is very, very even. And for Pakistan to pull out troops anything more than a brigade or so will, to my mind, be a bit of a challenge. But as you said, a division strength is what would be demanded perhaps from Pakistan. And that will be at some risk if they go ahead and do that.
Okay. Dr. Dorsey, can Field Marshal Asim Munir say no to Donald Trump on that issue of deploying forces in Gaza? And if he were to say no, what would be the consequences?
At this point, he wouldn't be the only one saying no. What you basically is you have a situation in which a number of countries that have been identified as potential contributors to an international stabilization force in Gaza have really said that they need to have a clear mandate. They've also sort of defined what they would like to see that mandate to be, but they further also made clear under what conditions they will and will not participate. So at this point, Pakistan would be in good company, and therefore probably would be in a position in which it could say no or yes, but.
Okay. Now, in case, and let me push this a little further. In case they were to say no here, but they would have to deploy forces should tensions spike in Saudi Arabia, or that is also something that has already been contained. The fact that Pakistan has already chosen a side in Libya, does that put Pakistan at odds with the United Nations? The talk of supplying JF-17 Thunders to the rebel forces in Benghazi? Dr. Dorsey?
Essentially, again, I think we've got to go back to that the UAE and the Saudis have very different strategies. In other words, the United Arab Emirates does not necessarily support the territorial integrity of states. On the contrary, it is willing to do business and to support secessionist and rebel forces. That's something the Pakistanis can say no to, because for all practical matters, it would be a violation of international law because it's a challenge to the sovereignty of a country and to its territorial integrity. So I think in those circumstances, yes, the Pakistanis could say no.
Okay. Ambassador Trigunayat, some say Asim Munir has already sent his family to the United States. There are co-commanders who are not very happy with him staying on, with Asim Munir staying on as army chief, along with being chief of defense forces. Internally, does this mean more trouble or more challenges for Asim Munir?
Of course, he has many challenges, and challenges will come from within, not from without. So I believe that he has problems, but at the same time, I mean, if one were to see and what is happening in Pakistan and the way people are looking at it, they have tried to do a good job in communicating to their own people that Asim Munir has some kind of an invincible fellow. So he's riding a bit high on that. And that is something that comes out as an observation. But he indeed has. I mean, they always go in the same way as his predecessors have gone.
Okay. General Hasnain, Asim Munir in one of his speeches said words to the effect that, he felt Allah's blessings during Operation Sindoor and that the gods were on his side or whatever else he may have meant, and that only the state can issue a fatwa. What does all of this indicate? Is he fighting on multiple fronts and he needs more than just his military or just his army with him? There are many who say even within the army, some co-commanders are not in his favor. There are some in the ISI who are very upset with him, especially after action that's been taken against General Faiz Hamid, former DG ISI. Does that indicate that he's now seeking divine intervention to protect himself?
See, Gaurav, this is a historical thing with the Pakistan army. Every commander who comes there ultimately thinks he's God's own, Allah's own. This is what Zia also thought at one time. In this case of Asim Munir, he's a Hafiz, and he sort of takes advantage of that by quoting all kind of scriptures in different public gatherings, and has created a persona around himself, an aura of larger than life. Such personalities historically always meet their doom at some stage, and very, very violent doom. I can tell you what happened on the 9th of February 2023 at Lahore. We all remember that. The kind of incidents which happened there and which were mishandled even under his command. And so there are all kinds of things which are going on in the Pakistan army. At the moment, no doubt he has consolidated power. The kind of perception management he's managed to do as a result of Operation Sindoor is something which is to his advantage at the moment. But that is only short term. To my mind, that is only a short term kind of an advantage. He's tying himself in too many knots internationally. In every direction, if you look, he's tying himself in knots. Therefore, 2026 may be the year of his doom.
Very interesting. You should predict that 2026 may be the year of doom for Asim Munir. Dr. Wael Awad, Pakistan and the UAE supporting, the Haftar forces in Benghazi, and, the Saudi Arabia and UN being in favor of the dispensation in Tripoli, as Dr. James Dorsey was also pointing out. In the long run, or in, as 2026 advances, could this mean more trouble for Pakistan vis-a-vis other Arab nations also, and not just the United Nations?
Well, I think, let us be very frank on this point. I think the United States pampering Pakistan again is not out of the blue. Actually, it is also meant that the Pakistani have a role to play, whether it is in the West Asia, whether it is the North African affairs, whether it's in the Islamic world. And that's why we see more prominent alliances between Turkey and Pakistan in many fields, and therefore with the Gulf country. However, if we, as I remember and as I assess, that the moment the United States put its hand with any country, it will increase and enhance its fall down. So I think Pakistan, if they do not recognize their national interest, they will be facing the music very soon, because involvement with such kind of a scenario of the new world order or the Middle East new world, a new order is really going to create a mess, and Pakistani will be fought against. That's why they are not sending to Gaza, because they don't know the rule and terms and conditions to the international forces in Gaza. What Israel will be dictating against them, are they international forces or just assisting Israel and the American against the Palestinians? So I don't think they are going to play with this sentiment. However, there is also another wider perspective picture we need to look at maybe in some other time. Is the now ending of political Islam is one of the main cards for the United States and the West, including Israel, that they want to end it in the Arab world and in Islamic world. And therefore,
But would ending, we'll leave that for another day, but would ending political Islam mean the rise of radical Islam or the radical elements? That's a debate perhaps for another day. But I want to thank all my guests, Dr. Dorsey, Ambassador Trigunayat, General Hasnain, and Dr. Wael Awad. As always, many thanks for joining me here on this India First special broadcast.